I'm Claire Adams, 27, and just a week ago I earned my MBA from Stanford, an accomplishment no one in my family had ever imagined. You might assume that made me the favorite child, yet within the Adams family, I was always the one fading quietly in the background. My sister Ashley, the aspiring doctor, has always been the pride of our parents, while I was merely the practical one who handled the bills and responsibilities no one noticed. For years, I convinced myself that if I just pushed harder, they'd finally acknowledge me. But somewhere deep inside, I knew I'd always be the outsider in my own family. What I couldn't foresee was that the evening meant to honor my success would instead destroy the fragile illusion of our closeness, when my parents would utter words so vicious they'd fracture us for good. In that moment, I realized the daughter they'd never truly accepted was about to vanish forever. Have you ever heard something so heartless you wished you could erase it from your memory, especially on a day meant to lift you up? If my story resonates, maybe sharing it will help someone else rediscover their own worth. We gathered at Delmonico's, one of the most elegant spots in Seattle. Crisp white tablecloths, golden chandeliers, and the soft murmur of wealth all around. I had booked the private room myself, covering every meal, every bottle, every last detail. It wasn't about showing off. After years of side jobs, student loans, and relentless effort, I simply wanted one evening to celebrate something I had truly earned. I welcomed each guest with a polite smile that never fully reached my eyes. Professors, colleagues, my supervisor from the consulting firm where I'd just secured a full-time position, and classmates who looked genuinely proud to be there. Then my parents arrived. Susan and Robert Adams, stylishly late as usual, perfectly dressed and composed, as if the celebration were theirs instead of mine. They carried no flowers, not even a simple card. Ashley wasn't there either. She was supposedly working a hospital shift, though I suspected she just didn't feel like attending an event that wasn't about her. I made the introductions, watching as my parents exchanged handshakes and polite smiles. Compliments flowed, the kind I had secretly wished they'd hear one day. One of my professors smiled and said, "You must be incredibly proud of Claire. A Stanford MBA is no easy accomplishment." My mother gave a small, airy laugh and replied, "We're proud of both our girls, but Ashley, our youngest, she's in med school now, pulling long hours in the ER, saving lives. That's what truly matters." Silence followed. You could almost hear the cutlery pause midair. My grin stayed fixed, rigid and practiced, like it had been fastened there just to survive the moment. A few minutes later, my manager rose to give a toast. He spoke about my determination, how I'd guided our intern team and kept everything afloat when deadlines loomed. "Claire is among the most capable young consultants I've ever worked with," he said proudly. "She's destined for great things." The applause that followed was warm and genuine. I turned toward my parents, hoping for even a flicker of pride in their eyes. My father let out a light laugh. "She's clever, sure, but Ashley, she's saving lives every day. That's the kind of pride that really matters." The words hit like a script they'd practiced, as if my whole life existed only to lead into Ashley's grand performance. The hero, the healer, the one who mattered. Around us, the table went stiff, eyes darting uncomfortably. One of my coworkers, bless her heart, tried to mend the tension. She leaned toward my mother and said gently, "Still, you must be very proud of Claire. What she's done is incredible." My mother's smile was cool, almost dismissive. "I suppose it's fine," she said. Then my father jumped back in, steering the topic once again toward Ashley's endless night shifts, rotations, and all the patients she'd helped. "Compared to a doctor," he added with a casual shrug, "an MBA doesn't quite measure up." That was the breaking point. I pushed back my chair, the sound slicing through the silence like a blade. Every conversation died. My voice came out steady, stronger than I expected. "Do you have any idea what it took for me to get here? How many nights I went without sleep? How many hours I worked while studying so I wouldn't cost you a cent?" My mother's lips pressed tightly together, a wall of quiet disapproval. My father looked at me like I was causing a spectacle. I paid Ashley's tuition. I sent money when the power was cut off. I went without so this family could survive. And still, I'm dismissed as just the one behind a desk? The air grew dense. Every breath in the room seemed to stop. By then, I wasn't speaking to the guests, only to the two people who had never truly seen me. If I'm as useless as you think, then who do you believe kept this family from falling apart all these years? My father rose, his face flushed with anger. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His reply was sharp enough to wound. We wish we never had a daughter like you. A collective gasp, the sound of a spoon hitting a plate. For a heartbeat, my vision swam. Not from tears, but from sudden, painful clarity. I looked around the table, seeing every shocked expression, every person who valued me for what I'd achieved, and then back at the two who had just erased me in an instant. When I finally spoke, my tone was calm, almost steady. If that's truly what you wish, then maybe it's time I start living as though I never belonged to you at all. And I left. If I was never truly wanted, maybe it was time to start living like I never belonged to them at all. I didn't shed a single tear that night, not when I stepped out of the restaurant, not when my heels echoed on the wet Seattle pavement beneath a soft drizzle that felt almost familiar, not even when I made it home, slipped off my shoes, and sat in the quiet darkness of my apartment. But the next morning, when I unlocked my phone and saw 11 missed calls from my parents and a single message that said, "You embarrassed us. I hope you're proud of yourself," that's when something inside me gave way. It wasn't sadness that hit me. It was sheer fatigue, because this wasn't some isolated moment. It was just the latest scene in a lifelong pattern I'd finally stopped pretending was normal. I wasn't surprised anymore. I was simply finished. All through my childhood, I was the quiet girl who faded into the background, while Ashley sparkled under every spotlight. We were only 2 years apart, yet it often felt like decades of distance in how we were loved. Ashley had piano recitals, ribbons for participation, birthday parties with towering cakes and golden balloons spelling out her name. I once got a cake that read, "Happy birthday, Ashley O. and Claire," scrawled awkwardly in the corner. A punchline that became a family favorite. They laughed. I didn't, but I smiled like I always did. I learned young that success only counted if it matched what they valued. When I brought home the first place certificate from the regional math competition, glowing with pride, I truly thought it might finally mean something. Mom didn't even glance up from the laundry basket. "That's nice," she said casually, "but Ashley's volunteering at the hospital." That phrase, real impact, was their mantra. It echoed through every conversation, every comparison. Apparently, nothing truly mattered unless it came with a stethoscope. Still, I didn't quit. I kept pushing, believing that if I achieved enough one day, they'd finally say what I'd spent my whole life waiting to hear. "We're proud of you, Claire." So I kept grinding. Through college, juggling 3 jobs at once. I opened the coffee shop at dawn, scrubbed offices after evening classes, and spent weekends tutoring kids from the neighborhood. Every paycheck disappeared, toward household bills, toward Ashley's endless med school expenses. No one ever asked how I managed it. They just accepted the help, as if it were owed. Michael used to tease that I was the only person who could balance a family budget faster than I could recognize my own worth. He said it with a grin, but there was always that flicker of tenderness in his eyes afterward. Michael had been my closest friend since college, the one person who always saw past the masks I wore. His story wasn't identical to mine, but it carried the same melody. His father, a former military man, demanded obedience with an iron hand. When Michael chose art instead of engineering, the man disowned him. But unlike me, Michael didn't spend years begging for approval. "You can't water dead roots, Claire," he once told me. "It's not your fault when nothing grows." At the time, I brushed it off, thinking he was just bitter. I still believed loyalty meant giving until there was nothing left to give. But that night, for the first time, his words began to make sense. After the disastrous dinner, Michael called. I couldn't bring myself to answer, but I replayed his voicemail over and over. "Claire, I'm proud of you, not just for speaking up, but for finally walking away. Call me when you're ready to breathe again." I wasn't ready yet. Not completely, but something inside me had begun to shift. For years, I'd clung to this fragile hope that if I stayed quiet and worked harder, my parents would finally turn toward me and see me. That hope had been my lifeline. But now, I was beginning to realize that maybe freedom comes only when you stop begging for love from people who will never give it. When I left my old apartment, I didn't take much, just the basics. My laptop, a few worn clothes, the books I couldn't let go of, and one framed photo from college. Michael and me on the campus lawn, holding coffee cups, grinning like fools at a world that still felt wide open. That was before everything got messy. Before I forgot how to smile the way I did in that photo. I found a small one-bedroom place in Bellevue. Simple but cozy, with hardwood floors, white walls, and a wide window looking out onto a quiet street, shaded by maple trees. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Paid for with my own earnings. Chosen, arranged, and lived in entirely by me. No Ashley, no Susan, no Robert, just Claire. That first night, I barely slept. I lay on a mattress set directly on the floor, staring up at the ceiling, surrounded by stillness. At first, the quiet felt hollow, but the longer I listened, the more I understood it wasn't emptiness. It was peace, something I hadn't felt in years. The next morning, I opened my laptop and checked my bank account. 3 automatic transfers were lined up. One to my parents' utility bills, one to Ashley's tuition, and another toward the family mortgage. I canceled each of them. My fingers shook slightly as I hit confirm. But a strange lightness settled in my chest. No explanations, no apologies, just done. Over the next few weeks, I started piecing together a life that finally belonged only to me. Work at the consulting firm began to take off. My manager handed me a major assignment, a restructuring project for a Fortune 500 tech company. I poured myself into it, staying late, running meetings, solving problems instinctively. For the first time, I wasn't chasing anyone's praise. I was doing it for me, and people began to take notice. More invitations to meetings, more requests for input. My ideas were finally being heard. My name started circulating, not as Ashley's sister or the dependable daughter, but as Claire Adams, the rising talent. Evenings became my sanctuary. I'd come home to my peaceful little apartment, where I added pieces that felt like fragments of myself. A soft gray couch, a lamp shaped like a tree branch, a tall bookshelf to finally unbox my paperbacks. I lined the window with succulents, lit candles, and played jazz while cooking dinner for one. It felt extravagant, almost selfish, and it felt wonderful. One Saturday, Michael showed up with a bottle of wine and 2 oversized bags of Thai food. Still breathing? He joked as he stepped inside like he'd been there 100 times. I smiled. I think I'm finally starting to live. We sat cross-legged on the floor, eating noodles, sipping cheap Cabernet, laughing about our college days. For a while, life felt light again. Simple, unburdened. I like this place, he said, glancing around. It feels like you. I hesitated, smiling faintly. I think I'm still figuring out what that means. He lifted his glass and said softly, to figuring it out. Our glasses touched, and a quiet warmth spread through me. It wasn't pride or relief. It was something gentler, maybe the first trace of self-acceptance, or at least the sense that I was finally moving toward it. Later that night, as I folded a blanket over the back of the couch, my phone buzzed. Mom, then again, Dad. No messages, just a string of missed calls, 10 in total. I didn't answer. I didn't even check them. Instead, I switched the phone to silent, wrapped myself in the blanket, and watched the streetlights flicker through the window. They had chosen silence for years. Now I was returning it, a silence they'd finally be forced to hear. Then came a knock, not gentle, not uncertain. It was firm, deliberate, demanding, the kind of knock that doesn't wait for an answer. It insists on being heard. I glanced at the clock. 4:13 p.m., a Tuesday. I'd just come back from work, still in heels, blazer slipping off my shoulders. When I opened the door, I went still. There they were, my parents, Robert and Susan Adams, standing as if nothing had ever happened. They looked immaculate, like they were paying a visit to property they still believed was theirs. My father wore a crisp button-down and polished leather shoes. My mother stood rigid in her beige trench coat, arms crossed, lips drawn tight like she was preparing for battle. I said nothing. I didn't move. We need to talk, my mother said. The last time we'd spoken, she told me I'd humiliated the family. Yet here she was, on my doorstep, pretending the wound didn't exist. Without waiting for me to respond, they walked right past and into my apartment. I closed the door slowly behind them. As if one wrong sound might set something off, they settled onto my couch, the one I'd bought myself, in the living room I'd built from my own hard work and sleepless nights, with money they'd never thanked me for. I stayed standing. "Claire," my father began, adjusting his tone into that smooth, professional cadence he used for meetings. "Ashley's run into some setbacks." Setbacks? That was the word he chose. Her hospital internship had been terminated. "Staff cuts," my mother said curtly. "And as for her tuition, the remaining balance hasn't been paid. If that doesn't get resolved soon, Ashley might have to leave the program." "And?" I asked, my tone flat. "And," my mother shot back, "we need your help." There it was. No apology, no trace of remorse. Just the same old refrain. "Help," I echoed, like it was a foreign word on my tongue. "Claire, you understand how critical this is?" My father said, his voice measured. "If she falls behind now, she could lose everything." "She?" I asked quietly. "Or you?" My mother's gaze hardened. "Don't be petty," she hissed. I let out a sharp, dry laugh that startled even me. I gave up years of my life for this family, paid bills when the lights went out, bought Ashley's textbooks, covered her rent, her groceries. I sacrificed so she could have it all. And the one time, just once, I asked for something back, you told me I disgraced you. "We were angry," my father barked. "You were disrespectful." I stepped closer, the sound of my heels striking the floor cutting through the tension. "No," I said evenly. "You disrespected me. For years, quietly, consistently, until it became the rhythm of our family. You didn't raise me. You drained me." My mother straightened, her arms unfolding. "We're your parents," she said sharply. "We brought you into this world, and I carried it," I replied, the words rising from somewhere deep. "I carried it while you stood on my back and praised someone else for standing taller." The air between us tightened, thin as a wire ready to snap. "You don't get to walk in here and pretend none of that happened," I said quietly but with force. "You don't get to act like you never told me you wished I'd never been born." My father's mouth opened, then shut again, the silence doing all the talking. I moved to the door and held it wide. "If you came here to apologize, I'd listen. But if you came to ask for more, that conversation ended the night you disowned me." Neither of them moved. "Claire, this is family," my mother said, her tone climbing. "Blood is blood, not when it's toxic," I said, shaking my head and nodding toward the hallway. They left stiffly, wordless. But before stepping through the doorway, my mother turned and said, "You'll regret this. Someday you'll realize you need your family." I met her eyes without blinking. "I already have one. It just doesn't include you." The door closed behind them with a soft click, and for the first time, there was nothing inside me but quiet. No guilt, no fear, no doubt. Just air, cool and clean, still, free. This time, when the door shut behind them, I didn't cry. I smiled. The weeks that followed moved in quiet rhythm. No calls, no texts, just silence. The same silence they once demanded from me. Except now it wasn't submission, it was strength. It wasn't the silence of someone shrinking. It was the calm of someone who had finally found her own voice in the quiet. At work, I poured myself into everything. I led meetings with a confidence that felt unfamiliar at first, like wearing someone else's jacket, until I realized it had always been tailored for me. People listened when I spoke. Clients began asking for me by name. Then came the big assignment. A multi-million-dollar restructuring for a tech giant out of Redmond, the kind of project that defines a young consultant's career. My manager handed it to me without hesitation. "You've earned this," he said. "Don't look back." And I didn't. For 6 weeks, I lived and breathed that project. Strategy sessions, late-night slide decks, pivot tables spinning across the screen until my eyes stung. But it didn't feel like burnout this time. It felt like purpose. Sharp, alive, mine. At night, I came home to an apartment that finally felt complete. The gray couch scattered with soft pillows. Shelves neatly stacked with books I'd once kept boxed away. Candles glowing faintly in the corners, filling the room with quiet warmth. It wasn't the house I grew up in. It was the home I'd built for myself, one emotional brick at a time. Michael stopped by often. Sometimes we didn't even talk, just shared leftovers in comfortable silence. Other nights, we played old records and argued about our college playlists. "You're different," he said once, leaning back on my couch, glass of red wine in hand. I looked at him, curious. "Different? How?" "You seem whole," he said softly, like you finally stopped waiting for someone to choose you. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The steady warmth rising in my chest spoke for me. Then came the article. Our project had exceeded every forecast. The client renewed, doubled their investment, and credited our team's strategy publicly. And there it was, my name, bold and unmistakable front and center. A local business magazine reached out for an interview. I said yes, though a part of me hesitated. I wasn't accustomed to being visible, but during the interview, I told the truth, not just about the project's success, but about the road that led me there. Without pointing fingers, I spoke about what it means to grow up unseen, to chase validation that never comes, and to finally stop needing it. The article was titled Rising Star, Claire Adams on Leading Through Resilience. It spread fast. First hundreds of likes, then thousands. My inbox filled with messages from strangers who said my words felt like their own. People confessing that they cried reading them. One sentence kept getting shared over and over. "You don't have to earn love from people who use it as a weapon." Michael texted me a screenshot circling that line. "Damn, Claire," he wrote. "You started a quiet revolution." But not everyone stayed quiet. Emails began flooding in from my parents. Clipped, angry, seething. "You've humiliated this family. How dare you speak about us in public? Ashley's struggling and you're out there showing off." I didn't answer. They shifted from guilt to accusation, and finally, back to silence. And I stayed still. For once, I didn't feel compelled to defend, explain, or repair. I let it shatter. And this time, I didn't rush to pick up the pieces. And somehow, when everything else had fallen apart, I hadn't. One evening, I stood before my floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of wine in hand, watching the Seattle skyline glitter, as if it were quietly rooting for me. I thought of that younger version of myself, the one who used to send half her paycheck home, waiting for gratitude that never came. I remembered that dinner, that single cruel sentence, "We wish we never had a daughter like you." And then it hit me. I used to believe silence meant surrender. Now I understood. Silence could be strength. The celebration I threw wasn't extravagant. It was small on purpose. No upscale venue. No obligatory guest list filled with names I barely recognized. Just a handful of close friends, colleagues who'd stood by me when life unraveled. And Michael, naturally, who arrived with 2 bottles of wine and a ridiculously large cheese board he insisted on arranging himself. It wasn't a party for achievement. It was a toast to endurance. I had just signed a leadership contract with the firm. Not something gifted to me, but a position I'd earned and negotiated entirely on my own. No one else's influence shadowed it. No strings tugged from behind. The apartment glowed in warm amber light. Soft jazz and indie tracks filled the background. Beyond the windows, Puget Sound shimmered under the night sky, the city pulsing gently, alive. Laughter rippled through the room. Someone raised a glass in my honor, and I laughed too. Not the practiced polite sound I'd once used to fill silence, but a genuine, unrestrained laugh, the kind that feels like breathing again. No one brought up Ashley. No one mentioned my parents. No one gave me that look of sympathy I'd grown used to. What I saw instead was pride and something softer, something that finally felt like love. Michael tapped his glass against mine and smiled. "Look around you," he said, gesturing toward the laughter and light. "This is the family you built, Claire." I nodded, the truth of it sinking in. "Yeah," I said quietly, "the kind that chose me too." Later, when everyone had gone, I stepped out onto the balcony. The air from the bay was brisk, clean, brushing through my hair like it was clearing away what was left of the past. Below, Seattle's lights shimmered like scattered stars. I finished the last sip of my wine and let myself breathe. I thought of all the unseen sacrifices, the years I kept giving until there was nothing left to give. I thought of that dinner, of those words I'll never unhear. But then I remembered the first time I stood up for myself, the first night I slept here, alone but safe, The first time someone told me they were proud of me and meant it. And it hit me. Maybe we don't get to choose the family we're born into, but we do get to decide which parts of that story stay with us and which ones we finally set down. Maybe love that demands proof isn't love at all. Maybe real freedom is learning to stop needing what was never freely offered. From inside, my phone began to buzz. Another message, this time from someone I didn't know, a stranger who'd read the article, found me through the noise, and wrote, "Your story helped me finally walk away from the pain I thought I had to accept." I smiled. I wasn't alone anymore, and neither were they. I stepped back inside and turned off the lights. The room still held the warmth of laughter, the faint scent of wine and candles lingering in the air. I'd spent years pleading for acknowledgement. Now I was finished pleading. I was creating, I was choosing. And for the first time, I knew exactly who I was. Not a daughter to be managed. Not a fallback plan. Not an invisible thread holding others together. Just me. Whole. Enough. Free. I may not be the daughter they wanted, but I am, at last, my own.